What if I told you that one of the most comprehensive global stock market indexes available to investors doesn't currently have a mainstream ETF tracking it? Well, that's exactly what we discovered when we started researching this video. Today, we're beginning a brand new series here on Effortless Investor, where we're going to find out the best ETFs for 5 of the world's major global equity indexes. And our first target is the FTSE Global All Cap Index. The idea sounds simple. Find the ETFs that track it, put them through our scoring system, and crown a winner. Except there's one problem. When we started looking for the best FTSE Global All Cap ETF available to a UK investor, we couldn't find one. There is a fund that tracks the index. There is an ETF that comes remarkably close. And there are signs that a genuine FTSE Global All Cap ETF may eventually be coming. But as things stand today, there is no qualifying mainstream ETF tracking the standard FTSE Global All Cap Index. And that makes this a rather unusual first episode, because we're not going to manufacture a winner where one doesn't exist. So let's find out exactly what's going on. Welcome back to Effortless Investor. If you're new here, this channel is all about making long-term investing as simple and evidence-based as possible. And today, we're starting a new series that I'm particularly excited about. We're going to be ranking the best ETFs available for 5 different global index families: the FTSE Global All Cap, the FTSE All-World, MSCI World, MSCI ACWI, and MSCI ACWI IMI. For every ETF we analyze, we'll use exactly the same scoring system. And that's important, because we're not going to look at the results and then decide which factors suddenly matter most. The rules come first, the data comes second, and the ranking comes last. Our scoring system gives every ETF a maximum of 100 points across 8 measurements. Tracking difference gets 30 points, OCF gets 15, trading cost gets 5, assets under management gets 15, liquidity and tradability gets 15, replication gets 8, securities lending gets 7, and structure and tax efficiency gets 5. So by the end of this series, we'll have a genuine Effortless Investor master leaderboard. But before we get to the leaderboard, we need to find some ETFs to put on it. And that's where the FTSE Global All Cap gets interesting. Let's start with the index itself. The FTSE Global All Cap Index is designed to represent the global equity market across developed and emerging markets, and across large, mid, and small cap companies. So unlike an index that only covers developed markets, or one that focuses exclusively on large companies, the Global All Cap is designed to go much further down the market cap spectrum. In simple terms, it is trying to answer a very straightforward question. What if I wanted to own essentially the entire global stock market in one investment? That's an extremely attractive proposition for a long-term investor. So you'd expect the ETF market to be full of products tracking it. Surely there must be plenty of them. Well, there aren't. But when we started researching this episode, we found 3 things worth discussing. The first is a genuine FTSE Global All Cap tracker. The second is an ETF which tracks a very closely related version of the index. And the third is a potential future ETF. Let's take them one at a time. The first product is the Vanguard FTSE Global All Cap Index Fund, ticker VAFTGAG. And this is important. This isn't an ETF. It's a traditional open-ended index fund, but it does something that the ETF we're about to discuss doesn't do. It tracks the actual FTSE Global All Cap Index. So if you are a UK investor looking for a direct implementation of the index, this is the product we need to know about. The fund has been around since 2016 and has grown to a substantial size. As of our research date, the underlying fund has around £10 billion of assets. So this isn't some tiny experimental fund. It is a large, established implementation of the index. It also uses physical replication through representative sampling, and the OCF is just 0.23%. But here's where things get interesting. Our most heavily weighted category is tracking difference. And when we look at the 3-year annualized performance, VAFTGAG, as we'll call it, has delivered a tracking difference of approximately minus 0.32% per year. That puts it into our 16 out of 30 tracking difference band. Now, that isn't disastrous. In fact, for a fund tracking an index containing thousands of securities across developed and emerging markets, tracking the benchmark to within a roughly third of a percentage point per year is reasonably respectable. But it isn't outstanding either. And remember, this is the actual index tracker. So VAFTGAG is incredibly useful for our analysis, but it can't enter our ETF leaderboard. Why? Because it isn't an ETF, and we're ranking ETFs. That's our first important distinction. So if VAFTGAG isn't an ETF, what is the closest thing available? That brings us to the Vanguard ESG Global All Cap UCITS ETF. You'll find this under tickers such as V3AB and V3AM, depending on the share class and listing. And at first glance, this looks like exactly what we're looking for. It's Vanguard, it's global, it's an all-cap ETF. It includes developed and emerging markets, it includes large, mid and small cap companies, and it has thousands of holdings. So surely, this is the FTSE Global All Cap ETF. Well, not quite. There's one word in the name that changes everything. ESG. And that brings us to the word choice. The ETF doesn't track the standard FTSE Global All Cap Index. It tracks the FTSE Global All Cap Choice Index. And choice isn't simply a marketing label. It represents a different index methodology. The Choice Index applies ESG-related exclusions and selection criteria. So while the two indexes have an enormous amount in common, they are not the same benchmark. And that matters enormously for this series. Because our question isn't, what's the best global all-cap ESG ETF? Our question is, what's the best ETF tracking the FTSE Global All Cap Index? And V3AB doesn't meet that definition. Now, I still think we should analyse it, because for a UK investor looking for a very broad global ETF, this is probably the closest mainstream ETF alternative to the product we're looking for. But we're going to give it a very specific status. Provisional Alternative Index. It can receive a score, but it cannot win the FTSE Global All Cap ETF ranking. And I think that's an important distinction. So let's put the ETF through our 100-point scoring system. And remember, this isn't a score for the FTSE Global All Cap Index. It's a score for the Vanguard ESG Global All Cap ETF tracking the FTSE Global All Cap Choice Index. Let's see how it performs. Starting with tracking difference, which is where the ETF performs very well. Looking at the fund's performance against its actual FTSE Global All Cap Choice benchmark, the recent 3-year record shows relatively close tracking. Our calculated annualized tracking difference is approximately minus 0.08% per year. That puts the ETF into our 28 out of 30 band. And this is actually a good illustration of why we use tracking difference rather than simply looking at the OCF. The ETF's OCF is 0.24%, but investors don't necessarily lose exactly 0.24% relative to the index every year. Securities lending, portfolio optimization, transaction costs, withholding taxes, and other factors can all influence the final tracking result. And in this case, the realized tracking difference has been considerably better than simply looking at the headline OCF would suggest. And speaking of OCF, it's currently 0.24%, and under our scoring system, that puts it in the 0.21% to 0.25% bracket, which gives it a score of 10 out of 15. It's certainly not the cheapest global equity ETF we'll encounter in this series, but we're not scoring it against an arbitrary ideal. We're applying in the same bands to every ETF. Next is the typical bid or ask spread. The spread we're seeing for the relevant UK trading line is around the 0.16% region, and our scoring system therefore gives it 2 out of 5. And this is one area where I think the score tells us something useful. V3AB is a perfectly established ETF, but it isn't one of the enormous, ultra-liquid global ETFs where you routinely see extremely tight spreads. So while the spread isn't catastrophic, it's also not a standout strength. The next category is assets under management, and this is another area where the ETF performs reasonably well. Vanguard reports total assets of approximately $1.77 billion across the fund. That's comfortably into the billion-dollar range, and under our scoring bands, gives us 10 out of 15. And this is worth emphasizing. The fund has reached a substantial scale. We're not talking about a tiny ETF with 20 million under management and an uncertain future. It's an established Vanguard product with billions of dollars in assets. Moving on to liquidity and tradability. This category is a little more complicated because we're deliberately not using trading volume as a simple proxy for liquidity. We're looking at 4 different things. First, the bid-ask spread. That's 4 out of 7. Second is the relative trading volume. That's 1 out of 3. Third, exchange listings and market access. That's 2 out of 2. And finally, market making and trading infrastructure. That's 2 out of 3, giving us 9 out of 15 total. The ETF benefits enormously from being a Vanguard product with multiple European listings and established trading infrastructure. For a UK investor, that's a positive. But the trading activity itself isn't strong enough for us to award the maximum score. Next is replication, and the fund uses physical replication. However, it doesn't buy every constituent in exactly the same weights. Instead, Vanguard uses representative sampling. That's entirely normal for a global index containing thousands of securities. Under our methodology, physical full replication gets 8, physical optimized or sampled replication gets 7, synthetic replication gets 5. So in this instance, V3AB receives 7 out of 8. The next one's an interesting one. Securities lending isn't automatically a negative. In fact, the ETF generates additional income through its securities lendings program. For the 6 months to December 2025, Vanguard reported approximately $55,000 of securities lending income. That's additional revenue generated by the portfolio. However, our methodology doesn't simply ask whether securities lendings exist. We look at the quality and transparency of the overall program. And while there is evidence of an established program, including lending income and institutional infrastructure, we don't have enough public detail to award the top score across all our criteria. So we're giving it a 5 out of 7. And finally, we come to structure. The ETF is an Irish domiciled UCITS ETF. It has UK reporting status and is part of Vanguard's established European UCITS structure. From the perspective of a UK investor, we don't see a material structural disadvantage that would justify deducting points. So it's 5 out of 5. Putting that all together gives us a total of 76 out of 100. That's a respectable score, but here's the really important part. It still isn't our winner, because it isn't tracking the index we're ranking. It's tracking the FTSE Global All Cap Choice Index, and that's why we've marked it Provisional Alternative Index. Now, when I originally recorded this section, I was going to tell you that there were signs Vanguard might be preparing a standard FTSE Global All Cap ETF. There had been regulatory filings, there had been changes to fund documentation, and there had been plenty of speculation about what Vanguard might be preparing. But at the time we completed our research, nothing had been officially announced. So, under our methodology, there was no ETF we could actually rank. But something has changed. In fact, something has changed while I've been editing this very video. On the 20th of August 2026, Vanguard officially announced the brand new ETF, the Vanguard FTSE Global All Cap UCITS ETF. And this is exactly the product we've been looking for. It tracks the standard FTSE Global All Cap Index, not the ESG version, not the Choice Index, the actual FTSE Global All Cap. And it is an ETF, so suddenly the conclusion of this video has changed. The new Vanguard ETF finally provides the implementation of the index we've been searching for throughout this entire video. And there are already some very interesting details. The new ETF has an ongoing charge figure of just 0.07%. That's significantly lower than the 0.23% OCF of Vanguard's existing FTSE Global All Cap Index Fund. Vanguard also has announced listings across several major exchanges in Europe, including the London Stock Exchange, giving UK investors access to the new product. On paper, this looks like a very serious new entrant into the global ETF market, but there's an important problem, and it's one that our scoring methodology has deliberately accounted for. The ETF is brand new, and that means there simply isn't enough data for us to assess it properly. So we're going to do something very important. We're not going to score it, we're not going to give it 0 points, we're not going to give it a provisional score, and we're not going to make assumptions about how it will perform. We're simply going to say it's too new to score, and I think that's the fairest approach. However, the Vanguard FTSE Global All Cap UCITS ETF is now officially on our Effortless Investor watch list, but we're going to leave it unranked for now. And when we eventually come to the final video in the series, we're going to bring together the winners from all 5 index families. Those winners will then go head to head using the same Effortless Investor scoring system. And by that point, the new Vanguard FTSE Global All Cap ETF should have had considerably more time to establish itself. That means we'll be able to assess it better than we can right now. Then, and only then, will we give it a proper or provisional score. So let's go back to the question we asked at the beginning of this video. What is the best FTSE Global All Cap ETF available to UK investors? When we started this research, the answer was there wasn't one. There was a direct mutual fund, which is VAFTGAG. There was an ESG screened ETF, which is V3AB. But there wasn't a mainstream ETF tracking the standard FTSE Global All Cap index. Now there is. Vanguard has officially announced the Vanguard FTSE Global All Cap UCITS ETF. It tracks the correct benchmark. It's an ETF. It has a headline OCF of just 0.07%, and it is being made available across major European exchanges, including the London Stock Exchange. So the landscape has changed. But our answer today is still, there is no official winner, but we're going to revisit it in the final showdown. But before we get to that final showdown, we've got 4 more index families to investigate. And next, we're moving on to the FTSE All-World. And this time, things are going to be very different, because there are already several established ETFs tracking the FTSE All-World index, which means we can finally have a proper competition. We'll take the leading ETFs and put every single one through the same 100-point scoring system. And then we'll find out which FTSE All-World ETF actually deserves the #1 spot. And eventually, those winners will all meet in that final Effortless Investor showdown. So if you want to see which ETF ultimately comes out on top, make sure you're subscribed. And I'll see you in the next one.